I'm 26 years old, and my name is Sienna. I never thought my family would betray me so completely. Leave the key and don't come back, my father said at dinner. My mother just stared and nodded. This house was never yours. My sister handed me a suitcase already packed. They erased me room by room until the bank called me. If you're watching this, please like and subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story changed my life forever. I grew up in a middle-class family in a small town near Grand Rapids, Michigan. Our home was a beautiful Victorian house with ornate woodwork stained glass windows and a wraparound porch that was the envy of the neighborhood. That house had been in our family for 3 generations, and I always dreamed it would be mine someday. My father, James, ran a successful local hardware business. He was stern and demanding with impossibly high expectations that seemed to apply only to me. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough for him. When I brought home straight A's, he would ask why I didn't have any extracurriculars. When I joined the debate team and won competitions, he wondered why I wasn't focusing more on practical skills. My mother, Diana, taught piano lessons in our front parlor. She was talented, but cold, rarely showing affection, and always deferring to my father's judgment. She would watch silently during his lectures about my shortcomings, occasionally nodding in agreement, but never speaking up in my defense. Then there was my sister Natalie, 5 years younger than me. From the day she was born, she was the golden child. Her artwork covered the refrigerator, her trophies lined the mantel, and her every achievement was celebrated with dinner outings and presents. She had our father's sharp features and our mother's musical talent, a perfect combination that made her the undisputed favorite. Despite the uneven treatment, I never stopped trying to earn their approval. I graduated as valedictorian, took advanced placement classes, and spent my summers volunteering at the local historical society. I hoped that somehow someday, they would look at me the way they looked at Natalie. When I was 16, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. During her treatment, I took over many of her responsibilities, cooking, cleaning, and even helping her younger piano students with their lessons. I would rush home from school to prepare dinner, help Natalie with her homework, and make sure the house was spotless before my father returned from work. My grades suffered a bit, which earned me stern lectures from my father, but I believed family came first. Meanwhile, Natalie continued her carefree childhood. She was too young to burden with responsibilities. My father would say, even as I juggled school and household duties. This created an unspoken competition between us. I resented her freedom and the unconditional love she received, while she seemed to resent my attempts to gain our parents' approval as if I was trying to steal something that rightfully belonged to her. The one person who truly saw me was my grandfather Thomas. He had built the hardware store that my father now ran, and he was the original owner of our Victorian home. While my parents focused on Natalie, Grandpa Thomas would invite me to help him with small restoration projects around the house. He taught me to appreciate the craftsmanship of the old woodwork, the history behind each architectural detail. This house has a soul, he would tell me, as we carefully restored the original crown molding in the dining room. Not everyone can hear it, but I know you can, Sienna. When I was 17, he took me aside during a family gathering. We sat on the porch swing he had built decades ago, and he squeezed my hand. "This house should belong to someone who truly loves it," he said quietly, looking at the carefully restored gingerbread trim I had helped him paint that summer. "Someone who understands its history and will protect its future." I didn't realize then that his words were a promise, but they stayed with me through the years. While other teenagers dreamed of leaving their hometowns, I imagined restoring each room of our Victorian to its original glory. I spent hours in the local library, researching the architectural style, learning about authentic restoration techniques, and sketching plans for preservation. During high school summers, I helped Grandpa Thomas repair the back staircase, restore the stained glass in the vestibule, and rebuild the porch railing to match the original design. We worked side by side, covered in sawdust and paint, as he shared stories about the house in his youth. Those were the happiest moments of my childhood, the only times I felt truly valued and understood. "You have a gift, Sienna," he would say, watching me carefully match the ornate patterns. "You see beyond what is to what could be. That's rare." While my parents praised Natalie for her mediocre watercolors, my grandfather taught me to rebuild history with my hands. It was through him that I developed my love for architecture and restoration, a passion that would shape my future in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Everything changed when I left for college. I was accepted to the University of Michigan's architecture program, about 3 hours from home. I chose architecture specifically because I wanted to learn how to properly restore our Victorian house someday. I imagined coming home with professional skills to continue the work Grandpa Thomas and I had started. But from the moment I moved into my dorm, I felt the distance growing between me and my family. My calls home were brief, with my parents always rushing to hand the phone to Natalie so she could talk about her latest accomplishments. When I asked about the house or Grandpa Thomas, they gave vague answers and changed the subject. I came home for Thanksgiving my freshman year to find my bedroom had been partially converted into a sitting room. My bed remained, but my desk was gone, replaced by an antique settee that had previously been in storage. My bookshelves had been emptied, my books boxed up and moved to the attic. "We needed a place for your mother's book club," my father explained when I asked about the changes. "You're barely here now and the room was going to waste." I swallowed my hurt and said nothing. This was just the beginning. With each visit home, more and more of my presence was erased from the house. By junior year, my bedroom had been completely transformed into a formal parlor. My things were either in the attic or had disappeared entirely. I was expected to sleep in the guest room when I visited like a temporary visitor, rather than a member of the family. My visits became less frequent. The cold reception, the erasure of my existence, and the growing feeling that I was unwelcome in my own home made each trip painful. Meanwhile, Natalie's room remained untouched, a shrine to her ongoing presence in the family, even when she was away at her arts camp or on trips with our parents. After graduation, I accepted a position at a prestigious architectural firm in Chicago that specialized in historical restoration. The irony wasn't lost on me. I would be restoring other people's historical homes, while my connection to my own family home was being systematically dismantled. My starting salary was modest, but I still sent money home monthly, partly to help with the household expenses, but mostly to pay back my parents for what I perceived as their sacrifice in helping with my education. My father never acknowledged these payments. They simply disappeared into the family accounts. The demands of my new job consumed my life. I worked long hours trying to prove myself in a competitive field. Dating was a luxury I couldn't afford. Between work and my monthly trips home, which grew increasingly shorter and more uncomfortable, I had little time for a social life. The few relationships I attempted fizzled quickly under the pressure of my schedule and emotional unavailability. The one bright spot in my new life was Daniel, a senior architect at my firm. He took me under his wing, mentoring me through difficult projects and defending my design choices in meetings with clients. Unlike my family, Daniel valued my perspective and encouraged my growth. He became my friend when I desperately needed one, though I kept him at arm's length, afraid to let anyone get too close. Then, during my second year at the firm, I received the call that changed everything. Grandpa Thomas had suffered a massive stroke. By the time I arrived at the hospital, he was gone. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, but I wasn't notified until Thursday evening, barely giving me time to request time off and make travel arrangements. When I arrived at the family home, the atmosphere was strange. My parents seemed tense, exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Natalie, now in her first year of college studying fine arts, was unusually quiet. After the service, relatives and friends gathered at our house. I overheard snippets of conversations about the will and what Thomas wanted, but whenever I approached, people would fall silent or change the subject. "When will the will be read?" I asked my father directly as we stood in the kitchen away from the guests. He stiffened. "That's been taken care of." "But I wasn't there," I said, confused. "Shouldn't all family members be present?" "It didn't concern you," he replied curtly, then walked away to refill his drink. I tried asking my mother, but she simply patted my hand and said, "Your father's handling everything, dear. Don't worry about it." Even more troubling was the request that I leave immediately after the gathering. When I mentioned staying the weekend, my mother looked panicked. "Oh, we have plans," she said vaguely, "and the guest room isn't made up. It would be better if you headed back tonight." I left that evening with a growing sense of unease. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on what. All I knew was that for the first time, I felt like an unwelcome stranger in the home where I'd grown up. where I'd help my grandfather lovingly restore every inch of woodwork and every pane of stained glass. 6 months after Grandpa Thomas's funeral, I took a long weekend to visit home. I hadn't been back since the funeral, and my calls had gone largely unanswered or had been cut short with excuses about bad timing. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt something was wrong. The house looked different. The antique mirror that had hung in the entryway for decades was gone. So was the hand-carved umbrella stand that Grandpa Thomas and I had restored one rainy Saturday when I was 15. "We redecorated a bit," my mother said dismissively when I asked about the missing pieces, "updating the look." But it wasn't just the entryway. Throughout the house, treasured antiques had disappeared. The grandfather clock from the hallway, the Victorian fainting couch from the parlor, the hand-painted china cabinet from the dining room, all gone. Most disturbing of all, Grandpa Thomas's bedroom was locked. When I tried the handle, my father appeared as if from nowhere. "We're keeping that room closed," he said sharply. "There's some damage to the ceiling, not safe." But I had seen him emerging from that room earlier with a large box. There was no construction equipment, no signs of repair work. That evening, I confronted him about the missing antiques. What happened to Grandpa's things, the pieces we restored together? He didn't look up from his newspaper. "We sold some things. The house was getting cluttered." Cluttered. Those pieces were family heirlooms. They were part of the house's history. He folded his newspaper deliberately, his face hardening. "They were our property to do with as we pleased. Your grandfather left the house and its contents to us." "All of it." That doesn't sound like Grandpa Thomas. He loved those pieces. "Well, he's not here anymore, is he?" My father's voice was cold. "And we needed the money for Natalie's art school tuition." I was stunned. "You sold family heirlooms to pay for Natalie's tuition. What about the money I've been sending home every month? That barely covers the property taxes," he scoffed. "Besides, investing in Natalie's future is a priority. She has real talent." The implication was clear. Unlike me, Natalie was worth the investment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the locked room, the missing antiques, my father's dismissive attitude. Something wasn't adding up. The next morning, I found Natalie in the kitchen making coffee. My sister had changed in the past year. At 21, she had adopted an artistic persona with paint-stained jeans and an air of studied nonchalance. But underneath, she was still the little sister who had always gotten her way. "What's really going on with Grandpa's things?" I asked her directly. "And why is his room locked?" She avoided my eyes. "Dad's handling Grandpa's estate. It's complicated." "Complicated how Grandpa would have wanted his things preserved, not sold off piecemeal." She shrugged, but I could see tension in her shoulders. "Maybe you didn't know Grandpa as well as you thought." "What's that supposed to mean? I spent more time with him than anyone." She finally looked at me, a strange mixture of guilt and defiance in her expression. "Grandpa left some specific instructions in his will. Dad's just following them." "What instructions?" "Why wasn't I told about this?" "Because it doesn't concern you," she said, echoing our father's words from the funeral. Then, perhaps feeling a twinge of conscience, she added, "Look, Dad says everything's being handled legally. That's all I know." But the way she couldn't meet my eyes told me she knew much more than she was saying. Later that day, I was looking for a spare phone charger in my father's home office when I noticed a folder labeled Thomas Estate on his desk. I knew I shouldn't look, but my growing suspicion overrode my scruples. Inside were bank statements, property assessments, and correspondence with an auction house about Victorian-era furnishings and collectibles. There were also papers from a real estate developer expressing interest in the property on Maple Street, our address. Before I could read further, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly replaced the folder and pretended to be searching for my charger. That evening, I overheard my father and Natalie talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when I heard the house plan, I stopped in the hallway. "Once the paperwork is finalized next month, we can move forward," my father was saying. "The developer's offer is more than fair." "But what about the historical designation?" Natalie asked. "Won't that be a problem?" "Not once we have clear title. Besides, the main facade will be preserved in the new design. The interior modifications won't affect the historical status." "And what about—" Natalie lowered her voice, but I still caught it. What about Sienna? She loves this house. Sienna made her choice when she moved to Chicago, my father said firmly. This house needs someone who's present, not someone who visits twice a year and sends checks to ease their conscience. I backed away, my heart pounding. They were planning to sell our family home to a developer, the home Grandpa Thomas and I had lovingly restored. The home he had promised would go to someone who truly loved it. But worse than that was the realization that my father, and by extension my mother and sister, had been systematically cutting me out of the family inheritance, selling off pieces I had helped restore, planning to sell the house itself, and all while accepting the money I sent home each month apparently under false pretenses. The next day I confronted Natalie again, this time more directly. "You're helping Dad sell the house, aren't you?" She had the grace to look ashamed. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're all conspiring to erase every trace of me from this family and cash in on Grandpa's legacy. That's not fair. You moved to Chicago and barely come back. Meanwhile, I'm here. I help Mom with her medical appointments. I help Dad with the business paperwork. I'm the one who's been present. I left for college and then got a job, Natalie. That's what adults do, and I've been sending money home every month to help with expenses." She looked away. "Dad says that's just your way of buying off your guilt for abandoning the family." I was speechless. Abandoning the family I'd gone to college and started a career, all while trying to maintain connections with a family that seemed increasingly determined to push me away. "What happened to my room?" I asked suddenly. "You turned it into a sitting room. And now it's something else entirely." A flicker of guilt crossed her face. "It's my studio now. I needed space for my canvases. And since you weren't using it—" "Not using it because I wasn't allowed to use it. Every time I come home, more of my existence is erased. And now I find out you're all planning to sell the house entirely." "The house is too big for just the three of us," she said defensively. "And the upkeep is expensive. The developer's plan would preserve the historical elements while creating a modern living space." "That's real estate speak for gutting it," I said bitterly. "Grandpa would be heartbroken." "Grandpa left the house to Dad," she insisted. "It's his decision what happens to it." But something in her eyes made me wonder if that was the whole truth. What had really been in Grandpa Thomas's will? And why had I been so deliberately excluded from finding out? The final confrontation came at dinner that night. The tension had been building all day, with my parents avoiding me and Natalie nervously flitting between rooms. We sat down to an unusually formal meal, with the good china and crystal that was normally reserved for holidays. I waited until my mother served dessert before bringing up what I discovered. "I know about the plans to sell the house," I said quietly. "And I know about the antiques being sold off." My father set down his fork. "Those decisions are none of your concern." "None of my concern. This is my family home too, and many of those antiques I helped Grandpa restore." "This stopped being your home when you chose your career over your family," my father said coldly. "That's not fair," I protested. "I went to college, got a job. How is that choosing against the family? And I've been sending money home every month. Money doesn't replace presence." My mother interjected, surprising me. She rarely contradicted my father. "You visit twice a year at most. Natalie has been here helping us." "Because you made it clear I wasn't welcome. You converted my room. You barely return my calls. You rush me out the door every time I visit." "What was I supposed to do?" My father's face hardened. "You were supposed to respect our wishes. This house, everything in it, belongs to us now. Your grandfather left it all to me." Something in his phrasing caught my attention. "Are you sure about that?" "Because Grandpa Thomas always said this house should belong to someone who truly loved it, someone who understood its history." A flash of something, uncertainty, fear, crossed my father's face. Then his expression settled into cold anger. "I've had enough of this conversation. The fact is, Sienna, you have no claim to this house or anything in it. Your grandfather's will was very clear." "Then let me see it," I challenged. "Show me the will." "I don't have to show you anything," he said, standing up abruptly. "In fact, I think it's time you left." "James," my mother said softly, but he silenced her with a look. "No, Diana, I'm done pretending. Sienna, I want you to leave. Now. Leave your house key on the table and don't come back." I stared at him in shock. "You're throwing me out." Your own daughter. This house was never yours, he said coldly. And frankly, you haven't been much of a daughter these past few years. I looked to my mother for support, but she just stared at her plate and nodded slightly. The betrayal cut deep. Then Natalie entered the dining room holding a suitcase. My suitcase already packed with the few belongings I'd brought for the weekend. I thought this might help, she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had planned this. They had known even before I arrived that they would be throwing me out. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a calculated move. With shaking hands, I removed my house key from my keychain and placed it on the table. The small brass key that I'd carried since I was 12 years old. The key to the house I had loved, the house where I had spent countless hours with my grandfather learning to appreciate history and craftsmanship. If this is what you want, I said, my voice breaking slightly, then fine. But don't pretend this is about me abandoning the family. This is about you choosing Natalie over me. It always has been. I took the suitcase from Natalie, our fingers brushing briefly. For a moment I thought I saw regret in her eyes, but then she looked away. Goodbye, I said, looking at each of them one last time. My father stone-faced and unyielding, my mother still staring at her plate, Natalie hovering uncertainly in the doorway. I hope whatever you're planning is worth destroying our family. Then I walked out the door of my childhood home, not knowing if I would ever return. That night was the lowest point of my life. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the only place I could afford on short notice. The room smelled of cigarettes and cheap cleaning products, a far cry from the polished wood and lavender sachets of my family home. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed and tried to make sense of what had happened. How had things gone so wrong? How could my family discard me so completely? I thought about the house, about all the work Grandpa Thomas and I had put into restoring it. I remembered his words. This house should belong to someone who truly loves it. Had that been meant for me? Or had I misinterpreted his meaning all these years? In desperation, I checked my bank account, thinking I might extend my stay and try to figure things out. But to my horror, my account balance was much lower than it should have been. The monthly transfers to my parents' account, which I had faithfully sent for years, had drained my savings more than I realized. I had less than $2,000 to my name. With shaking hands, I called the one person I knew I could trust. Daniel picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Sienna, is everything okay? It's after midnight. No, I admitted, my voice breaking. Everything's not okay. My family just threw me out. They've been selling off family heirlooms and they're planning to sell the house to a developer. I don't know what to do. His response was immediate and sure. Come back to Chicago. You can stay with me until you figure things out. Do you need money for the trip back? His kindness broke the dam, and I found myself crying for the first time that night. I'll be okay. I have enough for a bus ticket. But thank you, Daniel. I don't know what I'd do without you right now. That's what friends are for, he said softly. Call me when you're on the way, and I'll pick you up at the station. After we hung up, I noticed something at the bottom of my hastily packed suitcase. A folder I didn't recognize tucked between layers of clothing. Opening it, I found several documents inside, old property deeds letters, and what looked like copies of legal papers. One envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to me in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a letter dated just a month before his death. My dearest Sienna, it began. If you're reading this, I fear that things have not gone as I hoped. I've made arrangements for the house and its contents, but I know your father may try to circumvent my wishes. I've left copies of the important documents with my attorney and with the bank. Margaret Hamilton at First National has instructions to contact you if certain conditions are met. Trust her. She was a dear friend in my later years and knows the whole story. Remember what I told you about this house needing someone who truly loves it. That has always been you, my girl. No matter what happens, know that I am proud of you and the woman you've become. All my love, Grandpa Thomas. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Then I examined the other documents in the folder. They appeared to be copies of property records and what might have been parts of a will, though some pages were missing. One document caught my attention, a trust agreement naming me as a beneficiary with conditions I couldn't fully understand, without the complete document. As I was trying to make sense of it all, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Sienna Matthews?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is." "This is Margaret Hamilton from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding the Thomas Matthews estate and the property at 1423 Maple Street. We need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. There seem to be some irregularities with the paperwork that has been filed." My heart raced. This was the very person Grandpa Thomas had mentioned in his letter. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. "I'd prefer not to discuss that over the phone," she replied carefully. "But it's important that you come in. How soon can you meet?" "I'm actually leaving town tomorrow," I said. "I was planning to return to Chicago." "This is quite urgent," she insisted. "If you could delay your departure by a day, I believe it would be in your best interest." Something in her tone convinced me. "All right, I can meet tomorrow morning." "Perfect. 9 o'clock at our main branch downtown. Ask for me at the reception desk." She paused, then added, "And Sienna, you might want to bring those documents your grandfather left for you." I froze. "How did you know about those?" "Thomas was a careful man," she said simply. "He wanted to make sure you were protected. I'll see you tomorrow." After she hung up, I sat in the dingy motel room, staring at the folder in my lap. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt a flicker of hope. Whatever game my family was playing, it seemed Grandpa Thomas had anticipated it and had put safeguards in place to protect me and the house he loved. I texted Daniel to let him know I'd be delayed by a day, then tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. The next morning, I arrived at First National Bank feeling both nervous and determined. I had dressed in my most professional outfit, the one I reserved for important client meetings, and carried the folder of documents Grandpa Thomas had hidden in my suitcase. Margaret Hamilton turned out to be an elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. She greeted me warmly in a private conference room. "You look just like your grandfather," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "He was very proud of you, you know." "Thank you," I said, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "He meant a lot to me, too." She nodded, her expression softening briefly before turning businesslike. "I've asked you here because there have been some concerning developments regarding your grandfather's estate, particularly the house on Maple Street." "My family is planning to sell it to a developer," I said. "They claim Grandpa left everything to my father." "That's the issue," she said, opening a folder on the table. "According to the legal documents filed with the county, your father is indeed the sole heir. However," she pulled out another set of papers. "These are the documents your grandfather filed with us. They tell a very different story." She pushed the papers toward me. It was a copy of my grandfather's will, but not the version my father had apparently filed. In this, Grandpa Thomas had left the Victorian house to me with specific provisions that it be maintained as a single-family residence and that its historical character be preserved. "This can't be right," I said, stunned. "If this is the real will, how could my father file a different one?" "That's what concerns us," Margaret said grimly. "Your grandfather established a trust with this bank to oversee the transfer of the property and to ensure his wishes were followed. When your father presented documents showing he had sole ownership, it triggered an alert in our system. We've been investigating since then, which is why I'm only contacting you now, several months after your grandfather's passing." "Are you saying my father forged documents?" I could hardly believe it despite everything. "I'm saying there are significant discrepancies that need to be resolved," she replied carefully, "and that your grandfather anticipated potential difficulties. He left explicit instructions that you were to be informed if anyone attempted to sell the property or significantly alter it." She handed me another document, a letter from a real estate development company offering to purchase our family home for conversion into luxury condominiums. The letter was addressed to my father and dated just 2 weeks after Grandpa Thomas's funeral. "The timing is suspicious to say the least," Margaret noted, "especially given that your grandfather had repeatedly refused similar offers over the years." "What happens now?" I asked, still trying to process everything. "That depends on you," she said. As the rightful heir according to the trust documents we have on file, you have legal standing to contest the current arrangement. Our bank would support that action as the trustee of your grandfather's estate. I'd be suing my own family, I said quietly. She nodded sympathetically. I understand this puts you in a difficult position. Your grandfather feared this might happen, which is why he created multiple layers of protection for you and for the house. I thought about my family's betrayal, the secret selling of heirlooms, the erasure of my presence from the house, and finally the cold dismissal the night before. What do I need to do? I asked, straightening my shoulders. Margaret smiled approvingly. First, you'll need a good lawyer. I've taken the liberty of contacting Amanda Peterson. She specializes in estate litigation and knew your grandfather well. She's expecting your call. She handed me a business card. Second, don't confront your family directly just yet. We need time to gather evidence and build a case. The documents you brought will help, but we need more. What about the antiques that have already been sold? I asked. Many of them were pieces Grandpa and I restored together. If we can prove they were sold after your grandfather's death and were specifically mentioned in his will, we may be able to recover them or seek compensation, she explained. Make a list of everything you can remember with descriptions and approximate values if possible. By the end of our meeting, I had a clear plan of action, and for the first time since being thrown out of my family home, a sense of purpose. Margaret promised to secure the legal documents and begin the process of contesting my father's claim, while I would meet with Amanda Peterson to prepare for the legal battle ahead. As I left the bank, I called Daniel to update him on the situation. I won't be coming back to Chicago just yet, I explained. Turns out Grandpa left the house to me, not my father. There's going to be a legal fight. That's huge, Sienna, he said, sounding both surprised and pleased. Do you have somewhere to stay? Do you need me to come there? His offer touched me deeply. I'm okay for now. I've got a motel room and I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. But I might take you up on that offer if this drags on. Just say the word, he promised. I've got vacation time I can use. With Daniel's support and the knowledge that my grandfather had tried to protect me, I felt stronger. This wouldn't be easy. I was essentially declaring war on my own family. But for the first time, I understood that I wasn't alone in this fight. That afternoon, I met with Amanda Peterson, a formidable attorney in her 50s, who greeted me with firm handshake and keen eyes that missed nothing. Thomas was a dear friend, she told me in her office. He was concerned about how things might play out after his passing. That's why he put multiple safeguards in place. Together, we reviewed the documents I had and those Margaret Hamilton had forwarded from the bank. Amanda explained the legal process ahead in straightforward terms. We'll file an injunction to prevent any sale of the property or its contents while the case is pending, she said. Then we'll petition the court to recognize the will Thomas filed with the bank as the valid one. It won't be quick and it won't be pleasant, but based on what I'm seeing here, we have a strong case. What about the antiques that have already been sold? We'll include those in our complaint. Your father may be required to provide an accounting of all sales and transactions since Thomas's death. If we can prove these sales violated the terms of the true will, the court may order restitution. As I left Amanda's office with a thick folder of legal documents to review and sign, I felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. I never wanted to be at war with my family, but they had made their choice when they decided to erase me from their lives and steal what my grandfather had intended for me. That evening, back in my motel room, I began the task of documenting everything I could remember about the house and its contents. Each antique, each restoration project, each conversation with my grandfather about his wishes for the property. It was painful but necessary work cataloging the physical evidence of a lifetime of love and care that my family had tried to erase. As I wrote, I realized that this fight wasn't just about a house or antiques. It was about honoring my grandfather's memory and standing up for myself after years of being diminished and dismissed. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't go quietly this time. The legal battle began with a simple certified letter. Amanda had drafted a cease and desist notice informing my father that we were contesting his claim to my grandfather's estate and prohibiting any further sale of property or belongings. 3 days after our meeting, the letter was delivered to the house on Maple Street. The response was immediate and furious. My father called my cell phone something he rarely did, even when we were on speaking terms. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded when I answered. "Protecting what Grandpa wanted me to have," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I know about the real will, Dad. I know what he actually wanted." "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "There is only one will, and it names me as his heir. This is just a desperate attempt to get money you don't deserve." "It's not about money," I said. "It's about the house Grandpa and I restored together, the house he wanted preserved, not carved up into condos." There was a moment of silence. "Who told you about the condos?" he finally asked, his voice lower. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you tried to cut me out completely. You sold off antiques we restored. You erased me from that house room by room. And then you tried to steal my inheritance." "I am your father," he said coldly. "I don't steal from my children. Everything I've done has been legal and above board." "We'll let the court decide that," I replied. "In the meantime, don't sell anything else from that house. It's all part of the estate now." He hung up without another word. I sat in my motel room shaking but proud that I had stood my ground. Amanda had warned me not to engage directly, but now that the confrontation was over, I felt stronger. I had named the betrayal out loud, and the world hadn't ended. Over the next few weeks, the legal machinery began to turn. Amanda filed our petition with the probate court challenging my father's version of the will and presenting the evidence from the bank trust. The judge issued a temporary injunction preventing any sale or substantial alteration of the property while the case was pending. During this time, I moved from the motel to a small furnished apartment Amanda helped me find. I took a leave of absence from my job in Chicago, explaining the situation to my boss. To my surprise, he was understanding and assured me my position would be waiting when I returned. Daniel called daily offering support and occasional legal insights from a friend who practiced estate law in Illinois. After 2 weeks of phone calls, he surprised me by showing up at my door one Friday evening. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone," he said, simply standing there with a duffel bag and a takeout bag from my favorite restaurant in Chicago. Having him there made everything more bearable. He accompanied me to meetings with Amanda, helped me organize my documentation of the house contents, and provided a shoulder to lean on when the emotional toll became too much. As the case progressed, we began gathering evidence. Amanda subpoenaed records from auction houses and antique dealers, tracking down pieces that had been sold. We discovered that my father had been selling off items for months before my grandfather's death, something that strengthened our case considerably. The biggest break came when Margaret Hamilton found additional documentation in the bank's archives, a letter from my grandfather explicitly stating that he feared my father might try to circumvent his wishes, and providing detailed instructions for how the bank should proceed if that happened. "This is going to be crucial," Amanda told me when she reviewed the letter. "It establishes that Thomas was of sound mind and had specific concerns about your father's intentions." Meanwhile, my family circled the wagons. Relatives I'd been close to growing up suddenly wouldn't take my calls. Friends of the family crossed the street to avoid me when I ran into them downtown. I was painted as the greedy daughter trying to steal her family's home, while my father was the aggrieved parent just trying to do what was best for everyone. Natalie was the only one who reached out, sending a terse text message asking to meet. Against Daniel's advice, I agreed to see her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked tired when she arrived, the confident art student persona, replaced by a nervous young woman who couldn't meet my eyes. "Dad is furious," she said without preamble. "He's talking about disinheriting you completely, writing you out of his will, too." "I think we're past that point," I replied. "He already tried to steal my inheritance from Grandpa." She flinched. "He says he was just doing what Grandpa wanted, that you weren't responsible enough to manage the property." "And you believed him after everything?" She looked down at her untouched coffee. "I didn't know what to think. Dad always handled the business stuff. When he said Grandpa left everything to him, I had no reason to doubt it." "What about when he started selling Grandpa's things, the antiques we restored together? He said they were just things, that the memories were what mattered." She hesitated. "But then he started talking to the developer about converting the house and it didn't feel right." "Is that why you put those documents in my suitcase?" I asked quietly. Her head jerked up, surprise and guilt flashing across her face. How did you know? Who else could it have been? You're the one who packed my bag. She nodded slowly. I found them in Grandpa's room when we were clearing it out. Dad said to throw away all the paperwork, but I saw your name on that envelope. She swallowed hard. I didn't read everything, but I knew it was important. Why hide them for months, then give them to me right as I was being thrown out? She looked miserable. I was scared. Dad was so angry all the time, talking about how you abandoned the family, how you didn't deserve anything. Mom just went along with whatever he said. I didn't know what to do. I studied my sister, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. Not as the golden child who had everything handed to her, but as someone who had been manipulated just as I had been in a different way. Are you okay, Natalie? Really okay? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Everything's falling apart. Dad's obsessed with fighting you in court. Mom barely speaks. The house feels wrong without Grandpa, without you. I reached across the table and took her hand. It doesn't have to be this way. We could find a solution that works for everyone. She pulled her hand away. Dad won't compromise. He says you've betrayed the family by involving lawyers and the bank. He won't stop until he wins, even if it means losing both his daughters. She stood up, gathering her things. I have to go. He doesn't know I'm meeting you. Just be careful, okay? Dad's not thinking clearly about any of this. As she left, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps not all family bonds were irreparably broken. Natalie had taken a risk to help me in her own way. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship. The case continued to build. Amanda uncovered evidence that my father had begun negotiating with developers even before my grandfather's death, showing a clear intent to violate the provisions in the real will. We also located 3 former business associates of my grandfather, who were willing to testify that he had repeatedly expressed his intention to leave the house to me. Finally, after months of legal maneuvering, we had our day in court. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday in early spring, almost a year after I'd been thrown out of my family home. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. My parents sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, a corporate-looking man in an expensive suit. Natalie sat directly behind them, pale and nervous. Several relatives and family friends filled the seats behind them, a show of support that made my heart ache despite everything. On my side sat Daniel, who had taken more time off work to be with me for the hearing, and Margaret Hamilton from the bank. Amanda arranged her documents methodically as we waited for the judge. When Judge Carmichael entered, a hush fell over the room. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the case file. The hearing was both exhausting and surreal. I listened as Amanda presented our case clearly and convincingly, laying out the evidence of my grandfather's true intentions and my father's attempts to circumvent them. She called Margaret Hamilton to testify about the trust documents and my grandfather's explicit instructions. My father's attorney argued that the will filed with the county was the only valid one, that the bank documents were either forgeries or outdated drafts. He painted me as an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family duties, only returning to claim property when money was involved. The most difficult moment came when my father took the stand. He looked older than I remembered, the strain of the past year evident in the new lines on his face, but his voice was as firm and unyielding as ever, as he testified that my grandfather had changed his mind in his final months, deciding that the family home should remain under the control of his son, not his granddaughter, who had moved away and shown no interest in maintaining family connections. It was a lie, but delivered with such conviction that I could see some in the courtroom believing it. I gripped Daniel's hand under the table, drawing strength from his steady presence. When it was my turn to testify, I focused on the facts: the years spent helping my grandfather restore the house, the conversations about preservation, the documents he had hidden for me to find. I spoke about finding my belongings packed and being told to leave my key and never return. And I explained why this fight mattered to me. This isn't about money, I told the court. It's about honoring my grandfather's wishes. He wanted that house preserved as a single-family home, not carved up into condominiums. He trusted me to be its caretaker because he knew I loved it as much as he did. Every weekend of my teenage years was spent working alongside him, learning about historical restoration, understanding the soul of that house. This is his legacy, and I can't let it be destroyed. The judge listened carefully to both sides, asking occasional pointed questions. When all testimony was complete, she announced she would review the evidence and deliver her ruling the following week. That week was the longest of my life. Daniel had to return to Chicago for work, though he promised to come back for the ruling. I spent the days alternating between hope and despair, replaying every moment of the hearing in my mind, wondering if I'd said enough if the evidence was strong enough. When we reconvened the following Tuesday, the courtroom was even more crowded. Word had spread about the case, and several members of the local historical society had come to hear the outcome. Judge Carmichael entered with a thick folder of notes. She spent several minutes reviewing the key points of the case before looking up at the packed courtroom. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, I find that the will filed with First National Bank naming Sienna Matthews as the beneficiary of the property at 1423 Maple Street represents the true and final wishes of Thomas Matthews. Her voice was clear and firm. The document filed with the county appears to have been executed without proper witnesses and contains significant discrepancies when compared to known samples of Mr. Matthews' signature. She continued addressing the specifics of the ruling. The house and all its contents were legally mine. Any items sold after my grandfather's death would need to be accounted for, and fair market value paid to the estate, and my father would be required to pay court costs and reasonable attorney fees. Furthermore, she added, looking directly at my father, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible fraud in the filing of falsified will documents. This court takes such matters very seriously. I sat in stunned silence as the ruling sank in. I had won. The house was mine. My grandfather's wishes would be honored. Across the courtroom, my father's face was a mask of fury. My mother looked shell-shocked. Natalie surprisingly showed what might have been relief beneath her obvious distress. As we filed out of the courtroom, my mother approached me hesitantly. It was the first time we had spoken directly in almost a year. Sienna, she said quietly, could we talk privately? Amanda gave me a warning look, but I nodded. We stepped into an empty conference room off the main hallway. I didn't know, she said once the door closed behind us, about the will, about what your father was doing. I just trusted that he was handling things properly. You stood by and watched as he threw me out of the house, I reminded her. You didn't say a word in my defense. She looked down. I've never been good at standing up to him. It was easier to believe you had somehow wronged us than to question what he was doing. She hesitated. Your grandfather tried to warn me once about James's temper, about his flexibility with the truth when it suited him. I should have listened. What happens now? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. Your father won't forgive this easily. But Natalie needs you. She's been lost in all of this. And what about you, Mom? What do you need? She seemed startled by the question, as if no one had asked her that in a very long time. I need time, she finally said, to figure out who I am apart from all this, to decide what I want. It wasn't the reconciliation I might have hoped for, but it was honest. We parted with an awkward hug, the first physical contact we'd had in over a year. Outside the courthouse, Daniel was waiting with a bouquet of flowers and a broad smile. You did it, he said, pulling me into a hug. Your grandfather would be so proud. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to truly believe that it was over. The house was mine. I could go home. The first day back in the Victorian house on Maple Street was surreal. Amanda had arranged for the locks to be changed, and I entered with the new key feeling like both an owner and a stranger. The house was eerily quiet and noticeably emptier than I remembered. Many of the antiques were gone, sold off by my father before the injunction. Family photos had been removed, leaving pale rectangles on the wallpaper, where they had hung for decades. It felt like a house that had been partially packed for a move, caught in a limbo between past and future. It's going to take time to make it feel like home again, Daniel said gently, setting down the suitcases he'd carried in. He had taken a week off work to help me settle in a gesture that touched me deeply. Over the past year, our relationship had evolved from colleagues to friends to something deeper, though neither of us had put a name to it yet. His steady support through the darkest period of my life had shown me what true partnership could be. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. I worked with Amanda to track down as many of the sold antiques as possible. Some were recovered, others were compensated for financially as the court had ordered. My father, facing possible criminal charges for the fraudulent will, finally agreed to a settlement that included a full accounting of everything that had been removed from the house. I took a leave of absence from my firm in Chicago to focus on restoring the house. My boss was understanding, especially when I explained my background in historical restoration. He even suggested I document the process. It might make an interesting portfolio piece for future clients interested in preservation. Daniel traveled back and forth between Chicago and Michigan, spending weekends with me working on the house. We started with Grandpa Thomas's room, which had been stripped almost bare. As we cleaned and repaired, we discovered small treasures he had hidden throughout the house. Old photographs tucked behind baseboards, notes written on the underside of drawer bottoms, even a small box of keepsakes hidden in a false wall panel in the attic. Most touching was a letter I found behind a loose brick in the fireplace, dated just weeks before his death. My dearest Sienna, if you're finding this, then you've come home where you belong. This house has always been meant for you, the only one who truly understood its heart and soul. I've left other messages for you to find as you restore each room. Consider it our final project together. All my love, Grandpa Thomas. I cried when I read it, but they were healing tears. Daniel held me as I explained how Grandpa and I had always hidden little time capsules in the houses we restored. Coins, notes, small trinkets for future generations to discover. It seemed he had done the same for me, one last gift of connection across time. Slowly, the house began to feel like mine. I converted the formal dining room into a home office where I could work on architectural drawings. Daniel helped me restore the original kitchen features while updating the appliances. Each room became a blend of historical accuracy and comfortable modern living. Exactly what Grandpa Thomas had always advocated for. As spring turned to summer, I made a decision about my future. Rather than return to Chicago, I would open my own architectural firm specializing in historical restoration, operating from my home office. My former boss was supportive, even referring some Michigan-based clients my way to help me get started. Daniel was quieter when I told him my plans. "So you're staying here permanently," he said, looking around the half-finished kitchen we'd been working on. "Yes," I replied, suddenly worried about what this meant for us. "I feel like this is where I'm meant to be. But Chicago isn't that far, and we could still—" He smiled, taking my hands in his. "Actually, I've been thinking about making a change too. There's a growing market for historical restoration in Michigan, and my firm has been talking about opening a satellite office. I might know someone who could run it." "You'd move here?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "If that someone I care about very much wouldn't mind having me around more permanently," he said, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. My answer was to kiss him there in the kitchen. Grandpa Thomas and I had restored years ago, and that Daniel and I were now making our own. Not everything resolved so neatly. My father refused any attempt at reconciliation, maintaining that I had stolen his rightful inheritance. We communicated only through lawyers, a situation that broke my heart, but that I eventually accepted as necessary. My mother was more complicated. After the court case, she moved temporarily to my aunt's house, needing space from my father's anger. We began meeting occasionally for coffee, rebuilding our relationship in small, cautious steps. She apologized for her passivity, for not protecting me from my father's favoritism and manipulation. I learned to forgive her, understanding that she had been controlled in her own way. Natalie was perhaps the biggest surprise. After several months of awkward distance, she asked if she could come see the house. She arrived with a box of my childhood possessions she had rescued when my father was purging the house of my presence. "I should have done more," she said, as we sat on the porch swing. "I knew what Dad was doing wasn't right." "You did what you could," I assured her. You saved those documents. Without them, I might never have known the truth. Can I ask you something? She said hesitantly. Why do you love this house so much? What makes it so special to you? I thought about her question carefully. It's not just the house itself, though I do love every creaky floorboard and leaded glass window. It's what it represents. Continuity, history, care passed down through generations. Grandpa taught me that buildings have souls shaped by the people who love them. This house is full of memories, of him, of growing up, of learning to create and preserve beauty. She nodded slowly. I never saw it that way. For me, it was just where we lived. Maybe that's why Grandpa knew it should come to me, I suggested gently. Not because he loved me more, but because he knew I'd protect what makes it special. Over time, Natalie and I built a new relationship, one based on adult understanding, rather than childhood competition. She eventually moved to New York to pursue her art career, but visited regularly, slowly reclaiming her own connection to the family home. As for Daniel, he did indeed move to Michigan, initially commuting to Chicago, until his firm opened the satellite office he'd proposed. We worked together often, his engineering expertise complementing my architectural vision. The Victorian house on Maple Street became our shared project, our home, and eventually the place where he proposed one winter evening by the fire that Grandpa Thomas and I had rebuilt together years before. Today, the house is fully restored, a perfect blend of historical authenticity and modern comfort. Daniel and I run our businesses from the home office, specializing in preserving historic buildings throughout the Midwest. We've even won several awards for our restoration work. My grandfather's presence is still felt in every room in the craftsmanship we've preserved, and the small treasures I continue to discover hidden in unlikely places. Sometimes when I'm working on a particularly challenging project, I swear I can hear his voice guiding me, reminding me to respect the soul of the building. The journey from being thrown out with nothing but a hastily packed suitcase to becoming the rightful owner and caretaker of my family home taught me the most important lesson of all. Family isn't always defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and shared values. Daniel, our friends, and the chosen family we've built around us have given me the sense of belonging I always craved. As for the house that started it all, it stands proud on Maple Street. Its history preserved, its future secure, just as my grandfather intended. If my story has touched you in any way, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes fighting for what's rightfully yours is the first step toward healing. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against your own family? Comment below with your experience. Thank you for listening to my journey from heartbreak to homecoming. And remember, sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the beginning of something even better.